So I'm delighted to welcome today Simon Parr. Simon works for the Home Office and he is the Senior Responsible Officer at the Emergency Services Mobile Communications Programme. Simon, that is quite a mouthful. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the role entails?
Yeah, the explanation is probably shorter than the title. So the whole of the UK's emergency services radio network and the devices and the equipment that controls it inside all the control rooms is being replaced. 330,000 users, 88 control rooms, a program that has been going for 7 years, a total spend of around 11.8 to 12 billion pounds. And the R bit in all of that great long title is the bit that's important, because that's the bit that says I'm responsible to Parliament for delivering it.
Boy, okay, so quite a meaty role then, hey?
It's a huge role, yeah. It's quite a narrow field, but incredibly complex, as anyone running major programs will tell you.
Fantastic. Let's move to our first question then. So from a personal and professional point of view, how have you successfully transitioned organisations to lead in different cultures?
So I think that the principles of leadership, if you know, that have worked for me in positions of leadership I've had, have always been the same. How you apply them, and perhaps more interestingly, whether you're listened to or not, is different in the three roles I've had in the last 5 or 6 years. So role as a chief constable, it actually can be quite easy to lead people because you're in a disciplined organisation, and in the end they'll do what you tell them. So there's something about the difference between giving orders and leading. In that context, I think the bit that surprises people is when you actually start to try and develop people at the same time as lead them. So that actually allowing people to be the best they can be in their organisation by whether it's coaching, mentoring, challenging, anything that says to them, you can be better, and people need a different approach at the same time as maintaining that kind of complex organisation working. Mm-hmm. But actually the values that are behind that, for me anyway, about being honest, being fair, being kind. Kindness is a very underrated value. You can be kind to someone and say, I'm not going to promote you because actually that's not going to be good for you. And that can be the kindest thing to do. Sometimes the easy option is to give people what they want. And I think kindness is often equated with weakness, and they're not the same thing at all. Using your judgment, getting to know people, recognizing that you probably are wrong if everyone's telling you you're wrong, all those sorts of things are transferable across any role. On a professional level, moving out of that when I retired from policing and went into kind of working for myself as a contractor, two things happened. Firstly, despite being the same person as I was a week before, I'm immediately, you're just not listened to as much because you haven't got the badge of Chief Constable. Now, I was asked to go back into the Home Office as a contractor working on a different programme. And in that programme, I was saying exactly the same things as I'd been saying literally 2 weeks before. But because I wasn't a Chief Constable, people weren't listening as much. And that led me on a slightly more personal journey that it took a few years to really sink in, that my wife has often laughed at. She said, you've really missed being important. Yeah. And not in and of its own sake, but you miss being listened to. I used to refer to myself as someone who used to be listened to. And then suddenly I wasn't anymore because I didn't have the badge. And losing the badge of being the person in charge or the person responsible actually hit me more than I was expecting. And I found myself quite frustrated in places where I was working, and I was sitting there going, I'm sort of over here, a very junior person in this new ecosystem, could be dispensed with at a month's notice like any other contractor. And I know you're wrong. And you used to work for me and you're wrong, but you're not listening. And that's quite an interesting dynamic.
That, as you say, a very interesting dynamic. And golly, how on earth did you manage that one? So there must have been quite a bit of a mindset change for you personally, that shift as you move to work in the different organizations, and all these personal challenges that you experienced. How did you progress with that one? How did you move that on forward?
I think I probably ignored them to start with. I didn't spot them. They kind of sneaked up on me a little bit. I mean, to a certain extent, having retired, there was an element of a bit of relief. So I retired in 2015, and as my wife said, you've been on call since 1989. So there was something about being able to go out and say, well, I'm actually not taking the phone. And you kind of lost that drag on you, that demand, that kind of relentless pull that if I get rid of these 20 emails, if I go back in a minute, there'll be another 20. And actually getting rid of that was quite nice. And then for somebody who's worked in the public sector all the time, you get a sense of people in the private sector and that lack of permanence to a certain extent. You know, the fairly cutthroat nature of things. You can be switched on or off, and you can be used. You know, like a lot of people who are in the position I've been in before. A lot of people want you for about 18 months because actually what they really want is your contacts book, and they want to use you as a way in, as opposed to actually what you can offer them. And I was determined I wasn't going to go back into selling, into policing, and of course that shut down a lot of doors for me. But on a personal level, it probably took me 2 or 3 years to realise, you know, what was going on. That I was actually missing having an influence. I missed working with teams, as I mentioned earlier. I enjoyed developing people. I missed working with a team of people who I could help get better and who could make me get better, because of that very solitary nature of consulting, contracting, however you put it. And of course, I then ended up in a program, again, I was still in the policing world, where I was the deputy program director, working almost exclusively with other contractors. So you have all that responsibility and no authority whatsoever, because you can't have responsibility as a contractor. So you have to find different ways of influencing people. And the only way of doing that is to kind of eye on the prize of what's the outcome here, what are we trying to deliver? And so that was another lesson again. And then, of course, albeit in a different way, I go back full circle and was sort of approached, I can say the word headhunted, that sounds a bit grand, but I was approached from all sides at the back end of last year about going back in to this program for a few reasons. Firstly, simply because I was a former chief, but also I've been involved in this program in the last 2 years before I retired as the senior user for policing. So I've now gone the absolutely other side of the coin. But of course, you're suddenly back in charge again, and you're suddenly responsible. And you have, as I said, there's about 350, 400 people in the program, plus all the users, plus all the suppliers, plus the world and his wife in government, who are trying to help, inverted commas, me rescue what's been a very challenged program. And suddenly I'm responsible again. You think, I'm going to have to start using some of these skills again, because you could get quite lazy working for yourself. You can just say, well, I'm not doing it then. I'm going to work when I like. I'm going to work tonight. So I'm going to get back into the rhythm of working, back into the rhythm of actually leading again. And going back to the way I say, okay, how do I actually influence and create the right effect in this organisation?
So on to my final question, which you have actually already partly answered, but I wonder if you can give us a little bit more. How have you enabled change through those that you've led, and have you personally adapted to respond to the needs of the job? Can you give us some specific examples of what you've done?
The thing I've always tried to do is to try and bind people into a vision of what the outcome is, and make sure we're all agreed, not what the answer is first, but actually what's the right question. Because policing in particular is really, really good at saying, oh, look, we can do something, because policing loves to be operational, and it'll rush off and do something. And I've always tried to make sure is before we work out the answer, can we make sure we've answered the question, and we've got the right question. And I've previously sort of made the joke about if any people are a fan of Blackadder, and Baldrick's mother solved the problem of her low ceiling by cutting her own head off, which achieved the output she wanted, in that she stopped banging her head on the ceiling, but it wasn't actually the outcome that she probably would have preferred. And I've seen lots of things go that way. So what I try to do is ask a very simple question, you know, in policing, and the simple question is, what actually we're here to do? You know, we're here to make communities safer. So my direction to you is go and do everything you can ethically, and within the law and within the funding we've got, make your communities safer. Anybody think that's wrong? And actually asking a very simple, very big question like that can allow lots of small things underneath, and you can start to trust people to get on with that. And the similar thing with the program I've got now is a program that has got some absolutely brilliant people working on it, but they've been on it for about, some of them 8 or 9 years. And a program can develop a life of its own, and that actually what you do is about what the program does. And so we do this every quarter, and we've got a board meeting every 2 months, and we've got this to produce, and you just keep producing artifacts, as opposed to saying, well, okay, time out a bit. What do we want to achieve at the end of the next 6 months? What are the stage gates, literally? What are the stepping stones to getting where we need to be? Because the job of a program is to close itself down. The job of a program is to finish something that is pretty close to the original outcome that was desired. So the same principles are there. So what actually we're here to do, that's where we're going. And we're going to be like this. Now, within that, you use your skills, because you know better than me how to do all of this. and particularly in my case, in a world surrounded by genius technicians who know how mobile phones work, which I don't, and they know how they connect and all the complexity of all of that. So the adaptation is more about the environment for me.
Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I feel like there's a lot more that we could actually draw from you. And perhaps we'll have the pleasure of welcoming you onto a programme at Windsor in the near future.
I'd be delighted if you think I've got anything to offer.
Thank you so much. But for now, a massive thank you, and we look forward to hearing more from you going forwards.